Hello, everybody. Happy Hump Day. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. In this video, we have Chris Harrison explaining his Bachelor betrayal, but you have to understand something. He signed an NDA when he left the show. He'll never probably fully be able to explain the ins and outs of his outing from the show after 20 plus years as the host of The Bachelor, Bachelorette, Winter Games, Bachelor in Paradise, all these other shows, right? Well, now he's going to explain it on his podcast, but he explains it through the guise of what's going on in the golf world. And if you don't know anything about what's going on in the golf world, I'm going to share that all with you guys right here. We're going to just completely unwind this. Do me a favor, sit back. After you hit the like button, please, for the love of this channel, it's the off season, and the only way to grow and get recommended in YouTube's algorithm and continue to invest in the show and keep on making videos is to have as much algorithm muscle behind us, which means watching the full video in its entire length, hitting the like button, and leaving a comment. If you can do 2 of those 3 things, we'll be okay. Thank you so much. Follow me on Instagram at DNeals. I'll be live at 10 a.m. on Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Neal. I'll be talking about my interview today that I'm doing with fellow Bachelor commentators. I'll tell you who that is there. It'll air this weekend. And every afternoon, Bachelor Rush Hour, the hit podcast. So Chris Harrison has the most dramatic podcast ever, at least that's what he calls it. But it actually is pretty dramatic when we look at the June 6th episode, Blindsided Betrayal. In order for Chris to properly explain the golf betrayal that happened, because he's a big golf fan, that's going to line up with what his betrayal was. He's going to discuss how he was a puppet figure, talking head for the show. And anyway, before we get into that, let's listen to this quick 30-second explanation of what happened in the golf world, and then we'll play what Chris Harrison has to say.
Did golfers who stayed loyal to the PGA Tour get screwed? Following the announcement that the PGA Tour and LIV would merge after months of drama and public...
And you're wondering, what's LIV? LIV is a golf organization that was founded by a Saudi group in the Middle East. And there was a lot of pressure by members of the golf tour, PGA, that if they went to LIV, they wouldn't be allowed to work with the PGA. People had to draw a line in the sand. And why would you want to go to LIV? Well, they were offering $500 million contracts. Well, it just came out this week that LIV is actually pairing with PGA, which is a big deal because everyone that spoke out against LIV now kind of works with them.
Public tension. PGA Commissioner Jay Monahan said that golfers who didn't make the jump to LIV would be rewarded for staying loyal. And just to remind you, it's rumored that Tiger Woods turned down somewhere between $700 and $800 million from LIV, while Rory McIlroy turned down $500 million. So we can only hope that the PGA golfers' loyalty will pay off.
Now, I know that doesn't sound like a big deal to us here because we're like, oh, geez, they're already rich and everything. But imagine turning down upwards of $1 billion because you didn't want to play in an organization that had human rights issues and all the other issues that come with taking, money from the Saudi group. I don't want to get into it any farther, but you can understand that conundrum. And now, of course, PGA's like, oh, no, we're going to work with them. So Chris Harrison now explains that betrayal through his set of eyes.
Very, very soft landing spot for Jay Monahan and the Saudi group, who, by the way, won in this big time, to come and announce this merger. So after this announcement, and Jay Monahan completely contradicts hypocritically everything he has said and stood for the last year.
Which is, they're a bad organization. Don't work for them. They don't do X, Y, and Z. And now they teamed up with him.
We go to Golf Channel. When I tell you the analysts were like deer caught in the headlights, it's an understatement.
Okay, now, hold on, folks. I know, how is this going to relate back to Bachelor? You just have to stick with me here. Chris Harrison's going to talk about why this was also triggering to his story.
I felt justified, but I felt sad. These people now don't have talking points. They now have to think for themselves. They now have to navigate these uncharted waters because the safety net was ripped out from under them.
Well, and they're probably thinking about what they said over the past year and now how are they worried about contradicting points they made before, things they said before?
They were mumbling. They were stumbling. People that I really respect in this business had nothing to say. They literally were wide-eyed. Go back and watch. It's fascinating TV. These guys were all just kind of mumbling and stumbling and asking questions.
Kind of like his Good Morning America interview. Remember that?
And flash forward several hours. This just happened today. I usually don't like to date these things, but it's Tuesday. It's 1:30 in the afternoon Central Time when I'm taping this. So they've had several hours to try and gather their thoughts. Now these quote unquote journalists are asking questions, poignant questions, lobbing out questions like, maybe this is the best thing for golf. Maybe the entire geopolitical existence of the United States, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, shouldn't have been on the shoulders of Dustin Johnson. Maybe...
And read between the lines here, maybe, and again, I'm not saying this, but I feel like this is what Chris Harrison's implying. Maybe the whole war that happened with Matt James and Rachel Kirkconnell and the whole issue of his season shouldn't have been on the shoulders of Chris Harrison. I think that's what he's actually saying.
The President of the United States. Maybe some of these other political leaders could handle this. Maybe it's not on the golfers to figure this out. Now, there's still right and wrong here, and that needs to be settled, and that needs to be talked about, by the way. There needs to be questions about Saudi Arabia, about China, which the PGA Tour is massively in bed with. So when you get into this human rights thing, you can't just pick and choose. You can't cherry pick only because you were worried that this was going to cost your organization hundreds of millions of dollars. The same Saudi fund, they own, maybe it's not the majority, but they are massive shareholders in Uber.
So what he's saying is, if we're going to take the high road here and condemn PGA Tour members for working with Live Golf, the Saudi-backed golf organization, then we need to condemn everyone that works with Saudi-backed money, which, of course, is more widespread than people think. All right, so I'm going to jump to the 28-minute mark here where Chris Harrison talks about being triggered, but it was important to understand the comparisons he's making between the golf situation, which is we put all the blame on these golfers when there's bigger fish to fry, and how that relates to Chris Harrison taking the brunt of the blame. And again, this isn't me co-signing what he's saying, but this is what he's saying.
Crazy deals and restructure, but it wasn't enough. And the problem is, here's the very interesting thing of why you're wondering, how did this all happen? What was the tipping point? In my opinion, what happened was the guys that went to Live started winning because they were still able to play on some of the major championship. They were able to play on a couple tournaments. And one of them, Brooks Koepka, just won a major championship. He just won the PGA Championship. That screws the PGA Tour because now you don't have the best players in the world. Not all of them. You can't say the best players play here. The best players.
But I thought he wasn't allowed to play in the PGA.
Well, there was a loophole where these guys were allowed to play in about 4 or 5 certain tournaments a year called the majors. So they came over when they could and they were dominating. They played really well. So now all of a sudden Rory is losing and Brooks Koepka is winning. This doesn't look so good. So again, all of a sudden we wake up today shell-shocked. Nobody. And this is crazy in this day and age. Golf Channel.
By the way, shell-shocked might be a term we're not using anymore to describe this, but that's a different issue.
Nobody. New York Times, nobody had this story. Nobody had a sniff that this was coming down the pipe.
Was that triggering for you?
Yeah. What was triggering was just having the rug and the safety net completely pulled out from under you. Hearing one day, I love you, your family. Hey, brother, we got you. Don't worry. Just go say this. Just go do this. Rory, be the good guy. Trust us. We got you, man. And then you wake up today and you find out on Twitter that all of that was complete and utter bullshit. 100% bullshit.
Wow.
And Rory is now...
So Chris Harrison here saying that all of the family that he thought he worked with was all BS. And again, look, corporations are psychopathic. Of course, they're going to treat Chris Harrison like family when they need him and then dispose him when they don't. That's just what happens. But, you realize that just like Rory here was defending the PGA saying, I won't, he left $500 million on the table. Rory did here, McIlroy. And he... in doing that was sticking up for the PGA, who then didn't have his back. We've all got a story of this with one size or another about bosses, throwing us under the bus, right?
Left to go answer for his own words and his own deeds. And the PGA Tour, Jay Monahan's going to back him up?
So what was that moment for you?
Tell us, please.
The moment everything, yeah. There was a moment. There was a tipping point when that moment happened for me. I can't get into the details of it.
Damn.
But there was one night when that moment happened for me, when I had to say in my own life as my own man, with you by my side, enough is enough. Enough is enough.
And my guess that was when they, when he was replaced on his season. Because as we know, again, not co-signing it, but we do have to look and should talk about these things. When Chris Harrison first issued his apology statement, and then that wasn't enough. And then he issued, and I know we're going back a few years here, but then he issued his statement saying, I'm going to take some time to reflect. And then that wasn't enough. And then he finds out that he was uninvited from Katie Thurston's season of The Bachelorette, namely the day after or so when she tweeted, I don't feel comfortable having Chris Harrison as the host right now. So it was almost like if there was another month or two between seasons, maybe it would have died down or that conversation would have happened. I still think he missed the opportunity to have long form conversations. He did the traditional press, which I'm sure is what they wanted. Go on Good Morning America. It's synergy. It's part of the same network, blah. But anyway, so at some point, probably when he was replaced by Tayshia and Caitlyn, he was like, okay, if Tayshia and Caitlyn do good, if they're good co-hosts, they'll never have me back. So rather than wait for that moment, he negotiated his settlement to leave.
And I am a big believer in you got to pick that hill you want to die on. I picked my hill and I had to make a stand. I hope the best for Rory. These journalists, it's going to be interesting. Some of these people will lose their jobs. Some of these people will maybe not, quote unquote, be fired. They may just disappear into the ether.
Okay, so then we go to the 33-minute mark for our final clip here. Let me jump ahead here to get through some of the banter, if that's what you want to call it.
.com to see real client results.
Hold on. So we'll get to this here. And it's interesting. He can't share this. He signed an NDA. But he's still sharing the analogy of how he was effed over by his bosses the way some PGA Tour players were effed over after taking a stand. All right, let's get to this.
That's for her.
It's too many commercials. Every time I play this, it's a different commercial. Here we go.
So you said that this made you look at your own situation in new ways. What changed in your mind today?
It just made me sad. And it made me think of the things that were said to me, promises made, and things that I went through. When a line in the sand is drawn, whether it's me drawing it or whoever, and part of that was me drawing that line in the sand, there were friends, and you know this, there were dear friends that I had, some for almost 20 years, most all over a decade, that worked on the show. But when that line in the sand was drawn,
they chose health insurance.
So were friendships.
That's it.
And people,
they stuck it to you, Chris Harrison. They chose their health insurance or all these other issues. Look, the same thing would happen to me. The same thing would happen to anybody. This is the way humanity works. In times of struggle, we notice that people will not back each other. Some are loyal, but some will just choose but this company, don't bite the hand that feeds. And, look, I'm not saying he was right for his decision to leave or whatever his high road is. It's just like, look, this is humanity. We backstab each other. There's only loyalty when it benefits you, and then when it no longer benefits you, no more loyalty. And he learned that the hard way.
People I thought would be with me, stand beside me, stand in front of me, come with me. You're left without a net. You realize you're alone on this island. Like Rory McIlroy is finding out today, you're all alone, bud. Now it's you. And now everything you said is on you. Whether it was the PGA Tour pushing this, it's on you. And so now Rory has to personally go unwind all of these very sticky situations. And he will, because he has a foundation of being a well-respected, honest man. He's a good man. So he'll recover. He'll be fine. Brandel Chambly, I doubt he will. And there will be others that will fall.
And then Chris also discussed the fact that, he was speaking for the organization the way Rory was speaking for golf. And it does beg the question, which we've talked about. Would you try to fire somebody who's the press secretary for something the president does? Was Chris Harrison the press secretary of the Bachelor producers? In a way, it's almost like how stand-up comedians will get in trouble for telling jokes sometimes, even though they're telling jokes. Whereas if you saw a movie where a actor told that joke as another character, not as himself, that actor doesn't get upset. No one got mad at all the actors that were dropping the N-word in Tarantino films, at least not right away. But if a comedian on stage said that, you would get very upset. And in some ways it's rightful, but in others it's hard. My point is, it's hard to parse between Chris Harrison, the employee of The Bachelor, when he's talking to the audience, because no one wants to hear from the producers. They wanted to hear from Chris Harrison on the red carpet in the interviews. He spoke for the show. At what point does he get in trouble for speaking for the show versus sharing his own opinions? And that's the blurred line, and I don't have an answer to that, but that's just where it stands. I think it's interesting to have these conversations, especially several years later as we look back on it. It was the biggest shakeup in Bachelor history, and it's worth talking about. Will it happen again? Or did we learn something here? What did things go too far? I know people in the comment sections will take both sides. No, it was time for a change. Oh, or yes, Chris Harrison was robbed. Either way, I always love to hear from the source, and with Chris Harrison, it's always interesting to hear how he feels betrayed by the producers. At the very least, they are no better than him. All right, let me know what you guys think. More content coming your way right after this.